The Ex-President Perk deck. This perk deck was released with the Point Break Heists, and of course, just like with every other perk deck, every other skill is shared among all the perk decks like Helmet Popping, Blending In, Walk-in Closet, and Fast and Furious. I will not be going over those. However, I will be going over all of the unique aspects of the perk deck. So, Point Break. While your armor is up, you will store 4 health for every 1 enemy you or your crew kills. When your armor has been completely depleted and starts to regenerate, you will gain health equal to that stored health amount. Maximum amount of stored health depends on your equipped armor. The Emerging Force increases the amount of health stored from kills by 4. You also gain 10% more health. Your chance to dodge is increased by 10% when you have one of the ballistic vests equipped. Life of Ice increases the maximum health that can be stored by 50%. You gain 10% more health. Your chance to dodge is increased by 5%. Awakening Earth increases the amount of health stored from kills by 4. You gain 20% more health. Your chance to dodge is increased by 10% when you have one of the ballistic vests equipped. The Perfect Line. Killing an enemy speeds up your armor recovery time depending on how much armor you have. The more armor, the less recovery speed gained per kill. Armor recovery speed is reset whenever your armor recovers. And of course, you also get the deck completion bonus. So, the Ex-President, from reading the description, it seems like a very interesting perk deck that seems to piggyback on Grinder's regeneration characteristics, among other things. So, let's see what this perk deck looks like in some gameplay. The Ex-President Perk Deck. So, I know when I first looked at the description of this perk deck, I thought it was pretty overpowered. But, after actually using it, there are a lot of drawbacks that keep it grounded in reality. So, in a sense, it's kind of like a grinder type perk deck where your survivability is heavily focused on regenerating health. However, it can be used regardless of what armor you wear. I think this perk deck is incredibly interesting for the fact that it tries to cater to any playstyle, whereas most perk decks really just favor one setup, like Muscle pairing with Enforcer Technician builds and such. Unfortunately, at least for me, due to the nature of the skills in the perk deck itself, I think it highly favors a suit playstyle. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I believe this, but finding where to start is a little bit difficult. I guess I'll start with some of the mechanics of the perk deck itself. As you know, upon killing an enemy, either by you or your crew, you'll begin to store health and you'll also gain dodge for both the suit and the ballistic vests. Now, the last part of this is fairly vague on how much armor recovery you get per kill, but essentially, when you kill things without armor, it helps speed up your regen. Now, you can store a fairly large amount of health in it, and have it reserved for as long as possible until you completely break your armor. However, one thing that the perk deck doesn't mention is that whenever you break your armor, the entirety of the stored health will be consumed, whether or not you actually needed all of it. So, say you take damage that drains 10% of your health, but you have maybe a health reserve of 60%. If your armor completely breaks, and even if you don't take any more damage, you'll completely use up your reserve, meaning nothing is saved for the next time you take health damage. Which, I guess it makes sense. You know, if it only gave you enough health to put you back to 100%, and you can keep some of the extra health saved from the reserve, this perk deck would be pretty goddamn powerful. But, yeah, one of the drawbacks that we don't see in the description is the fact that the reserve is completely dried up every time it's used. Another thing that makes this perk deck much more difficult to use than Grinder is the fact that you need to break your armor before you actually regen any health. On Death Wish, that makes things extremely precarious since the damage you take is much higher than that of any other difficulty, and a few shots could down you. Of course, if you play reserved, it works out fine in the end, but one of the most difficult things about this perk deck is trying to regenerate health when you have very low health. After you go down once on Death Wish, you will revive with a very small sliver of health. And basically, if your armor breaks, someone farting in your general direction will kill you. Trying to ascertain the balance between taking enough damage to break your armor, but not take away any more of your health, is an incredibly difficult matter. I found that when I used this perk deck on Death Wish, if I went down, I could just go down again and again because I was trying to regain my health, but it was pretty goddamn hard. So, this is one of the first reasons why I think a suit is the most beneficial armor for this perk deck. If you're wearing heavy armor, you're not going to be dodging anything. meaning your entire survivability is reliant on keeping your armor up. Once it falls, nothing is there to protect you from taking health damage. However, with a suit and dodge, there's a chance that even after you break your armor, you'll survive based on your dodge, which can help you regen health better as well. Because this perk deck makes surviving at low health difficult, I like to run fugitive mini-meds on my builds. I'll have decent self-sustainability in terms of health, since when you have more health you can afford to take a bullet or two and still be okay and regen more health than you lost, but if I ever go too low, I can take a mini-med and put me back in a more comfortable zone. With Grinder, you don't really have to worry about any of this, since you can just regen health anytime. And it doesn't even matter if you kill anything, since just hitting them is good enough. So while I don't think this perk deck quite compares to Grinder as much as some people like to think, it's definitely not a bad perk deck. The amount of health you can keep in your reserve is quite substantial, and because you get it back all at once unlike Grinder, it means you're pretty tanky in your own unique way. As we saw earlier, this build gives dodge to both the suit and the ballistic vests, so if you use low tier armor, you'll be getting more dodge than if you were to run Grinder. On Grinder with the suit, you have 10 dodge, and on Ex-President with the suit, you have 15. With a lightweight ballistic vest, I think you get no dodge with Grinder, and with Ex-President, you get 5. Now, without skills to boost your dodge, it's not a huge difference, but it's still a nice factor adding to your survivability with the new perk deck. And if you do decide to run Sneaky Bastard from Fugitive, you have the capability of increasing your dodge even more, for up to 25 with a suit and 15 with a lightweight ballistic vest. Now, that's some pretty goddamn good dodge. And in this particular gameplay, I actually have a build with Sneaky Bastard to help me get that extra dodge. So, another reason why I think a suit is the most beneficial armor for this build is for the same reason why I think overall, the Rogue perk deck is better than the Crook perk deck. It's because when you run Ballistic Vest, you get slightly more armor at the cost of less dodge. But in my opinion, I think the extra dodge is way more handy for your survivability. And I feel like this applies to the Ex-President perk deck as well. The middle tier armors really just don't seem to be worth using, at least to me. Hell, that really applies to most setups in this game. You often just go ICTV or suit. So, one more thing I wanted to mention about this perk deck is that I actually think there's one skill that makes this perk deck pretty goddamn awesome. Bullseye. Now, Bullseye is the skill in Fugitive that gives you some small armor regen for every successful headshot you get with a 2-second cooldown. Now, the reason why I think this skill is amazing for the Ex-President perk deck is because this small bit of armor regen actually contributes to the regen of your health. Anytime you have reserve health saved up and you score a headshot while your armor is broken, you'll instantly recover both a small portion of your armor and the entirety of your reserved health. Now, it doesn't actually sound like it's that useful, but when you're using it in gameplay, it's incredibly handy since your armor regen is pretty slow. And by activating Bullseye, you can alleviate some of the pain of waiting for your armor to start regenning to gain health. Like, say you score a headshot instantly right after your armor breaks. That means that you won't have to wait very long for you to get your health back, whereas normally, you'd have to play very safe and make sure you don't take any more damage to get your armor regen as fast as possible. Having Bullseye cuts down immensely on one of the biggest drawbacks of the perk deck itself, as long as you can score consistent headshots. And, since the last part of this perk deck helps with your armor recovery when you or your crew kills things, this just pairs really well with Bullseye. I think it's a great combo, especially if I plan on playing with a heavy Fugitive build anyway. Oh, and one last thing that I wanted to say about the perk deck. This perk deck really benefits from having a decent team, as the reserve health you acquire is also gained when a teammate kills enemies. I noticed that when playing solo, I didn't get nearly the same amount of health I got saved up as I would if I played with other people, so that's a small little team aspect of this perk deck that I actually think is pretty nice. Anyway, that's really all I've got to say about this perk deck. I think it's pretty decent, and it's fairly fun to play as well. It's definitely not bad, at least in my opinion, but it's also not on the same level as Grinder is.